If you got your real estate license during or after 2020, there's a good chance the market did a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Homes were selling quickly, multiple offers were common, and buyers were waiving protections, and sellers had more leverage than many of us had ever seen. And while that market created a lot of opportunity, it also allowed certain skills to get a little rusty, or for newer agents, never fully develop in the first place. Welcome back to Real Talk. I'm Katie Lamboglia, broker owner of True North Realty. Join us today as Tammy and I talk about what happens when the market stops making the job look easy. North Carolina has moved into a much more balanced environment. Homes are taking longer to sell, price reductions are becoming more common, and both buyers and sellers are expecting more from their agents. And honestly, that's not necessarily bad news. Good markets can make agents comfortable. More challenging markets force us to become better. So today, we're breaking down 4 skills agents need to sharpen right now, and why this market may be one of the best opportunities we've had in years to separate real skill from simply being at the right place at the right time. So let's get into it. So Tammy, remind me, what was the year you got licensed?
I got licensed in 2018.
Okay, and a lot has changed since
Just a little has changed.
Tell me from your perspective, because you've been in the business for a while too, and the market is cyclical. Tell me from your perspective what you feel like has changed most between then and now at time of filming, which is 2026.
When I first started in real estate, we could literally put a sign in the yard, have one photo in the MLS, and get a contract.
Yeah, that's true. We miss those days.
We miss them for sellers, but we don't miss them for our buyers.
That's the irony, in having this discussion, and, this is something we talk about all the time. It's very relevant in our industry, and it really depends on what side you're on, of if it's
Absolutely.
a good market or a bad market.
Yes.
As you said, from a listing perspective, it was easy times back then, which I think, and this is kind of what we're getting into with this video, I think it maybe permitted agents to lack the skill set that the flip side of that market requires, which is what we're in now. So what do you feel like are some of the things you've observed from agents and what's required of them in that market versus this market?
In that market, you did not need marketing skills.
That's true.
You did very little to sell a house.
Yeah.
And in the market we're in now, you have to know good marketing skills, great communication with sellers, because that house is sitting on the market 30, 60, 90 days. In the other market, it sat on the 24 hours.
Yeah.
Sometimes 48 hours.
Yeah.
And you had no skills to communicate with that seller. It was a very short relationship.
Right.
And now you're kind of married to your sellers.
And there's a lot of highs and lows and communication and come to Jesus meetings, and
There's a lot of emotions at times.
For sure. I think, the discussions, I think, is a really good thing that you pointed out. There's a perception of our industry that realtors sometimes don't do much. And those types of markets maybe creates that perception, because you're right. There was a time in which I feel like you could sell a house in spite of yourself. Really, you put a sign up and buyers just come running to you. I don't think that's a reflection of the skill set that our industry needs. And of course, being a buyer's agent in that market required a lot of skill and a lot of negotiating and a lot of patience. And then the flip side of that is, now in this market, to have a buyer, you have negotiating room, you have leverage. To have a seller, that's a more difficult discussion now. So I do think it depends on what side you're on, but different markets require different skill sets, and a well-rounded agent is able to navigate both markets, which I guess, being that it's cyclical, it feels like it kind of weeds out, I hate to say it, but agents who thought it was just going to be an easy paycheck.
Yes, for sure. And what I experience in a daily coaching call, we are always working on our skills and conversations because of those market shifts.
Exactly. And I think that is worth noting, and to Tammy's point, aligning with a brokerage that is going to equip you with the skill set to where you are not afraid of any market, that you simply lean into the market and you better your skills to adapt to the market. The market of today that we find ourselves in is, I think, leaning heavily on the listing side skill set, being able to have conversations about price reductions, being able to deliver market realities. Because one of the things we've seen, and comment below if you've been in the business for a while, and I imagine this is nationwide, sellers still think it's 2021. They still think that's the value of their home. And sometimes I think buyers still think it's 2008 where you're offering, tax value, So setting expectations, don't you agree? Just having the proper expectation discussions with your clients, that's a skill set.
Absolutely. And when I'm talking to a seller at that listing appointment, I'm listening to them. What are their goals?
Yeah.
I set the expectation from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. When you lead with data, we have these conversations at the office all the time. Lead with data because we cannot control the market we're in, but it's our job as a fiduciary to your client. If you're watching this, you're an agent, to deliver the facts and to deliver sometimes the hard news of this is not Katie or Tammy's opinion of value of your home. This is the market's perception of value. And the market's perception of value is determined by the buyers of today's market, not the buyers of the 2021 market with different interest rates. Obviously days on market is a little higher in this market in North Carolina. Comment below with what state you're in if you're watching this from somewhere else and that's not the case. Because I do believe there's markets within markets. And knowing yours is your job as an agent, to know your market well and to communicate that clearly. But I definitely think that being that we had an easy market, so to speak, for the seller side, has now created agents that are either learning the skills for the first time or reapplying the skills in a new way. Because it's not just new agents. I mean, you could be licensed for 20 years and it'd be like, wow, okay, I've gotten a little rusty. I hadn't had to have a price reduction conversation in a while. And so to shift with the market, don't you agree? Just being adaptable.
Being adaptable, being coachable, having someone that you mentor with that says, hey, I'm seeing that you're struggling a little bit with your conversations. What can we do to help you feel stronger? And I think that's a big benefit of the way we run the brokerage here and lean into skills that we share.
Yeah.
We don't hold back, and there can be veteran agents who are struggling because maybe they haven't had to have a hard conversation with a seller about pricing.
Yeah.
And we know at a listing appointment, if you're 90 days on market, we're really starting a listing with a buyer that may not even know they're looking yet.
Correct.
We're
That's
out
true.
here marketing a home, and that buyer may not come along for 2 months.
Yeah.
Because even within our market, different price points have different days on market,
Exactly.
different absorption rates, and we look at that when we're sitting down. If you're listing a property under $300,000, it's a totally different market than if you're up at $900,000 and how many
Exactly.
buyers you have.
Exactly. I feel like market data is relevant to the variables of your situation. You can't compare days on market to $1 million+ property and compare days on market to a $250,000 home. And of course, part of that discussion is comps, but also active inventory, because that's your competition. That is something to look at. And these are all discussions that, back in the heyday of, and we're using 2021, 2022, before the rates went up, where buyers were just flooding in. Now, it was a terrible time to be a buyer.
Yes, it was.
I felt terrible for these first-time home buyers because they were overpaying, don't you think? I mean, I think there was the double-edged sword to those times.
They were overpaying. They were giving up concessions. They were paying high due diligence fees. I had an FHA buyer that put in 13 offers before they got one accepted.
Oh, yeah.
Because that market leaned to cash and conventional loans, and first-time home buyers utilizing an FHA loan or a veteran using their VA loan really struggled in that market getting an offer accepted, and it wasn't fair.
No, I do think it's worth differentiating. We are not in a bad market. I feel like we're in a normal market. And so by comparison, you may look like, oh gosh, it's a hard time to be a seller. Well, maybe things are just stabilized, and maybe they needed to, because if you ask a first-time home buyer, it needed to, because they just about had to just tap out. They couldn't even enter the ring and make an offer on a property when they're competing with highest and best, 40, 50,000 over list price, cash, waiving appraisals, just waiving inspections. It became irresponsible, I think. So, we look back favorably for the sellers, but man, it wasn't so favorable for the buyers. And I think it took a different skill set to represent a buyer in that time period versus now. So it's not that you ever don't need skill. It's that you need to have all the skills and need to apply them correctly in the right market environment to serve your client.
Right. When I sit at a listing appointment with a seller now, I can tell them, what I'm seeing as a listing agent receiving offers. I can also share how my buyers view homes
Yeah.
and what they're looking for and things that they say, hey, that's going to be $20,000 to fix. In reality, it might be a $5,000 fix if the seller would just take care of it before they listed it.
Yeah.
So I come with data, and I also come with experience when I sit down at the listing appointment to share with the seller what's really happening in the offers that I see.
Yeah.
I don't reveal confidential information, but I can say we are seeing prices come in under list price. We're seeing seller concessions. We're seeing requests for some of your personal property that you thought you might get to keep.
Yeah.
And the buyers are looking for what's attractive because they are also looking at new construction
Yeah.
that offers incentives,
It's hard to compete against
all
that.
the appliances, including a washer and a dryer.
Yeah.
And they start giving you a harder time with listing and offers just because they've looked down the street at that new construction.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I'm seeing often is sellers wanting to list at the price that they feel like maybe is comparable to what they bought it for, which unfortunately we are seeing some buyers that paid a little too much because of the frenzy years ago. And now when they go to sell, they're in a bit of a pickle because they owe so much on it or they overpaid for it. So I think also just setting those expectations of what is the list to sell price ratio in this market, in your price range, and price it properly. I feel like that's more important than ever right now, because the strategy of listing it high and giving yourself a ton of negotiating room, it backfires in this market because days on market accrue. There are buyers out there purchasing homes and they're going to skip right over yours if it's not priced correctly.
That's true. And a normal appreciation for our housing inventory is 4% if you look at national numbers.
Yeah.
And when we balanced in 2022 to 2023, during the good days, we were seeing appreciation of double digits month over month.
Yeah, it wasn't sustainable.
It was not sustainable for the market. And now when they come and sit down with you, they're looking at a seller net and they're going, well, I'm not really going to make much money. I don't have any market appreciation. That's because we balanced. And instead of double digit appreciation, we're 4% year over year.
Yeah.
And when you factor in their expenses and any improvements they've done, sometimes they may be bringing money to the table or losing a down payment that they put down when they did their 20% deposit.
Yeah.
So those are painful discussions, and I always go back to motivation. Why am I sitting here today?
Yeah.
What is your next plan? If there's a pain point and you have no choice, let's do the best we can to get you the most money possible and protect your bottom line.
Exactly.
At the same time, if you could hold it another year or two, we may see things change as interest rates come down.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And that kind of gets us to our first point that I feel like, we had mentioned there's really 4 skill sets that I feel like agents are now required to refine in this market. And of course, kind of going along the lines of the listing agent perspective, since that's what you just shared, I do feel like pricing properly, pricing to reflect today's market data, conversations around pricing that sets expectations. I think that's more important than ever. And that's a skill set that this market does require because
Yes.
things have changed.
Yes, we're not throwing a dart at the wall in this market.
No, and that's how it felt. It almost back in the day, say 5-6 years ago, it felt like you put a sign up, you just whisper into the wind that there's a listing coming, and people line up at the door because inventory was tight, rates were good, and buyers were flooding in. And sellers could get just about what they wanted. I mean, that was an inventory issue, and of course now you've got a lot of new construction in our area. It equalizes the market a little bit. But pricing being a strategy, not a promise, because I do think that's a mistake agents make. Never promise a price. We don't have a crystal ball.
No, we do not have a crystal ball on
No,
pricing, and we
no.
don't know how the market is going to react to the home when it goes on. Price, condition, location. Those are the 3 main factors that bring the buyer in.
Exactly.
And they could reject it for any of these 3 or all 3.
Yeah, exactly. And, we always tell sellers, like, it only takes one buyer, right? I never sit down at a listing appointment and make a promise of obtaining a certain price. It's a method, and it's a promise of a service and a promise of communication, and a promise of transparency and trust and a standard and excellent marketing all of which should obtain the one buyer's attention that it's worth the most to. And our job is to just give you good options. You don't have to take any of them. You know, we tell sellers, we're going to list your home and we're going to discuss price. There's no right or wrong price here. We're going to estimate the average buyer's perception of value based off of market data, and then we're going to see how the market responds to it. There's no better data than the feedback from today's market, and it should steer those conversations. And that is why ongoing communication is a skill set that I think is really important in this market. Is you don't just put a sign up and call for highest and best. It's you enter the market at an appropriate price, you market it broadly and beautifully, and then see how the market responds to it, and prepare your seller that you may have to make some adjustments if weeks go by and you're not getting any bites. You might have come in too high. Do you see that?
I see that.
Yeah.
I've experienced that with some of my sellers, and I always go back to the data each week with my seller report.
Yeah.
How many showings were in your price point?
Mm-hmm.
We may have only seen 4 buyers in a $10,000 increment in a week's time.
Yeah.
And we didn't attract the attention of any of those 4. Mm-hmm. And then we go back to the price, condition, location. What can we change?
Yeah.
Generally, we can't change much about condition. We can't pick a house up and move it. So it becomes price.
Yeah. That's
And
exactly right.
what can the seller tolerate? We can rerun a seller net. Mm-hmm. What does it look like at a lower price? Is that something you can move forward with? I've had conversations with sellers where we're underwater.
Yeah.
And how much can they bring to the table because the pain of them having to move was something that they didn't choose. Things changed in their life and they had to move.
Yeah. You have to bring money to closing, which, you know, we're having discussions about short sales now that we haven't had in a long time. And that's what these incredible market conditions create when things get out of balance, because what comes up must come down. And now we are occasionally seeing buyers that got caught up in the frenzy, maybe overpaid, maybe borrowed a little too much, and they got to sell now. And appreciation has not kept up. Inventory has flooded in some markets, and it has not helped your value, right? So I think that is definitely a good point. And something else you said that I think, just to kind of touch on, communication is so important. And especially in this market, if you represent a seller, if they're calling you for an update, you're already late. Like, they shouldn't have to call you and say, what's going on with my listing? Just because you don't have an offer to present does not mean you don't reach out and talk to your seller. They need to know what you're doing every week on the marketing efforts, on the reach, on the feedback from the showings. This is the market data you need to adjust your strategy. And you should be strategic. You're employed to do a job. And that is all valuable information that you need to be gathering, organizing, and then communicating back to your seller with a plan, because that's what you're paid to do. We're not paid to list homes, we're paid to sell homes. And newsflash, we don't get paid unless it sells. So it's in everyone's best interest to be constantly adapting to the market we're in.
That's a skill that agents really didn't develop before the interest rates went up. Mm-hmm. They didn't have to have a lot of hard conversations with their sellers.
Yeah.
At the listing appointment now, I share with them, you're going to hear from me weekly, sometimes more than once a week.
Yeah.
What's going on in the market? What are we hearing from agents? If we've had no showings, what can we do to get some agents in there?
Yeah.
We go through all the strategies at that listing appointment because I want them to know, I want them to get the most money possible for their home, and I'm going to use data and communication to help them get to that point.
Exactly.
And we did not have to have that skill in 2021 and 2022.
No, I agree. And that kind of gets us to the next skill that I think this kind of segues into well, is the ability to negotiate. Because calling for highest and best was really not a negotiation. It was saying, come and get it, you know, and all the power was on the seller's side. It's easy to negotiate when you have all the leverage. You got to get creative sometimes on a seller's side now. You know, what's important to the buyer? You know, how can we, you know, do we need to do some sort of seller concession? Do we need to help with your closing costs? It requires negotiation now. And that's a skill that agents should have, but they're having to use it more for the seller now. They were negotiating their little hearts out back with, you know, in 2021 with the buyers, but in this market, don't you agree? I think being on the listing side requires a lot more negotiation and creativity.
It does. It requires us to reach out to the buyer's agent and say, hey, what is important to your buyer? what concerned them about our listing if you didn't bring us an offer? What can we do to work with you?
Yeah.
Back during the COVID time, we would get 20 offers on a house, and I would make 20 phone calls.
Yeah.
I was the agent who would gather the information, go over it with the seller. They would choose their offer, and I would call that agent with the great news, and then I would call 19 more agents
19 consolation calls
with the news that they
Yeah.
weren't selected.
Yeah.
And then they were vying for backup position. And my sellers had so many options at that point. Now we may have 20 buyers in our buyer pool in reverse prospecting. We need to call those agents and say, what can we do to get you in the door? What does your buyer need? What's their timeline? And it has shifted where we are negotiating on behalf of our sellers to protect their bottom line and get the best offer possible.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree completely. I think back in those days, to have a seller or to have a listing was to basically have a paycheck. And it's almost reversed now. To have a buyer who's pre-qualified, approved, ready, and willing, they can probably find a home and they can probably negotiate favorable terms and, Lord willing, not be in a bidding war. So, and this is just a little sidebar. This is why we always tell buyers, obviously this channel is for realtors, but you could also be a home buyer yourself in this market. This is why we say don't wait for the rates to come down, because everybody that did that, look at the boat they're in now. They maybe overpaid for their home because of the frenzy. So you can always refinance, but this is a better market to be a buyer in for all of these obvious reasons. You finally can negotiate with a little bit of leverage because there's less of them than there are of you, so to be able to have that position, because markets flip and the market is cyclical.
It is.
Yeah.
And if you go back historically, when interest rates were very high in the 80s, it was 23 years. You don't want to wait for 23 years as a buyer and continue renting.
Right.
Take the opportunity to get into the market and keep an eye on the refinancing. Have that relationship with your agent and your lender that you can say, hey, I noticed interest rates have dropped. Is this a good time to refinance?
Yeah.
And have that discussion, because while you're looking at the pricing going, this inventory is out of control. It's too expensive. I can't get into the market at this price. Talk to your lender. Get creative on that offer, because we have sellers who will work with you now.
Absolutely.
And being able to articulate that is very important no matter which side you're on,
Yeah.
because you want people to have information about real estate. You're not here just about your bottom line.
Yeah.
You're here to help people make a change in their financial future.
Yeah, exactly. And I think leaning into the market of the moment and saying, okay, any negotiation should end where everybody feels like they won. That's the secret of it. And looking at the challenges of the buyers, looking at the challenges of the sellers, a very natural negotiation I've seen often, you've probably seen this too, is a seller concession to buy the rate down for the buyer. Because the buyer's coming to the table saying, look, I would maybe buy your house, but the rates are a little high right now. And the seller's saying, what can I do for you? What can I do to sweeten the deal? And I've seen a lot of folks get creative to make both parties win and to negotiate through the objection of high rates, the objection of stale inventory, to say, let's help each other out. We want to sell our house and you want a lower rate. Let's work something out. And that's, so much of our business and what we do is trying to help everybody win. I mean, really, that's what we're trying to do. Everybody really wants to get to the closing table. It just has to be terms that are attractive to both sides. And that's negotiation. And that's something that we really didn't have to do whenever we were just throwing out the highest possible number just to get the offer accepted. That's not negotiation. That was the Wild West. I mean, it got nuts there for a while.
It did. I saw crazy numbers on due diligence on low-priced homes because the buyer was so desperate to get their offer accepted. And when you see $10,000 due diligence that's risk money, or you see $50,000 or even $100,000, that if the buyer walked away, they would not get that money back.
Yeah.
That was not a good market, and that was a lot of risk for sellers as well.
Yeah, it was risk for everybody.
What
That's
if
funny
something
we're fighting over
popped up that you had no idea was going on with your house, and you said, well, I'm not fixing that because I just got $50,000 from that buyer.
Yeah.
That was not a good situation for that seller, and be legal risk at some point
Yeah.
if a buyer came back and said, you should have worked with me
Yeah.
on this, and you made me suck it up and buy this house that you probably should have fixed this
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah, I agree. We did see a lot of that. And, buyers did that because they had to in that market. But the very thing, and I think this is the irony, and I think what is unfortunate about that market to be a buyer is the irony that it's the significant amount of skin in the game that got your offer accepted in the first place. That same exact feature or aspect of your agreement with that seller is the very thing that's going to make them not negotiate with you. Because they're going to say, I got $50,000. You want me to repair something? What are you going to do? Walk away from this $50,000? It's a little bit of a power trip the sellers had. And that was a difficult time. And I think, honestly, it almost became irresponsible. And I started to, feel bad for these first time buyers because what's it going to take? And then pricing a home was difficult. What's it worth? I don't know. Let's find out. Whatever we list it at, they're just going to throw numbers at it anyway. So there's a flip side to that. I do think and you kind of pointed this out earlier, marketing. When you had buyers lined up before you even took pictures, what marketing did it even require? And now it's completely different.
Oh, it is. And I think technology has changed a lot in the last 4 years.
100%.
We did not see a lot of videos
Yeah.
back in the market where we could just stick a sign in the yard. And I literally sold houses with one picture in the MLS.
Yeah.
I didn't pay a professional photographer.
Yeah.
I didn't need to.
No. Yeah.
And now we have professional photographers who do videography. We have to keep things fresh and new looking. And we've developed through technology changes and the market shift to an industry that we feel like we're content creators.
Yeah.
And if you're not a content creator and you sit down at the listing appointment, you may not get the listing because your ways of selling a house may be antiquated and didn't keep up with technology.
Exactly. I could not agree more. And I feel like every market's different, but the one trait, and I say this all the time, the one trait you can have as an agent that will sustain any market is just adapt and evolve and learn new ways of doing things, because even in 4 or 5 years, things have changed. Not just the requirement to do it because of the market conditions, but the method in which you do it. You do need to market a property properly now, and the method that you would do that with today should look completely different than it did 5 years ago. So I think that gives hope to you new agents, because just because you're competing against an agent for a listing that maybe's done this 20, 30 years, that doesn't always make them the best fit. And if you're a seller out there, that's why we encourage you to interview multiple agents and actually ask what they're going to do for you. Because it's not enough just to say, well, I've done this a long time. Well, how do you do it? And do you do it the same way you did in the 90s? Because if that's the case, it's not going to work today. Mm-hmm. And marketing is a skill set that is more important than ever right now. Because to your point, so much is expected of agents. I mean, you're basically a media company that sells real estate. That's honestly how we've modeled True North, is to be a marketing company, because there's really, that's on a listing side, one of the more important skill sets you have, and it does affect a seller's bottom line.
It absolutely does. And I don't spend a lot of time at that listing appointment talking about me and the things I do. However, I do let my work speak for itself.
Exactly.
And I encourage them, if you're interviewing agents, look them up on social media, whatever platform you use, and see if they're there.
Yeah.
Because the buyers for your house are probably going to have similar things that you have, and they're probably on that same social media platform. If the agent is not on there, your house is not going to get the attention it could get with an agent who is very involved with a broad reach across social media channels.
Exactly.
And a firm that also has a broad reach.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a great partnership here. Is not only do I do a lot on social media, we partner together as a firm.
Yeah.
And support all of our agents in their efforts to get the most for their listings with the highest visibility, so that the sellers know that we truly care about their bottom line. It's not just take it or leave it.
Yeah.
I'll stick a sign in the yard and get professional photos, and we'll hope for the best.
Fingers. Yeah.
We'll hope for the best.
Yeah, exactly. Marketing does affect a seller's net proceeds, because the broader you cast that net, the more opportunities you have. So I do think technology lends itself to that conversation, because a lot of buyers begin their search online. And so to have presence there to make sure that your home, which is the product we are employed to sell, looks its best, is syndicated broadly, and partnered with other agents and firms and syndication platforms online, that is going to expose it to the widest range of buyers. That does affect your buyer pool, and that affects value. Do I think that every single home requires the drone and the video in the house? I guess it depends on each seller in that discussion, and it's not one size fits all. But you can just about bet that the more buyers you get it in front of and the better it looks, the more calls you're going to get, the more competition you can create. And if you price it correctly, you can sort of create your own market conditions. If you price it competitively, you can get multiple offers. And psychologically, that may actually create a higher sell price for that buyer than if you listed it high and you just keep coming down. The higher the days on market, the less negotiable that you come into that discussion with.
Right, you lose leverage.
Exactly.
The more days on market, and we are blessed to live in an area people want to come here.
Yeah.
I listed a home and put it in the MLS on Friday, and I had a buyer drive from Virginia the next day, and we were under contract on Monday.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen to every listing. However, the reach that we have, getting it out there, got to that buyer day one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they came down and took action. We don't always see that. Some buyers will look at 40 homes in this market because they want to get the perfect one for them.
Yeah.
And some have had the time to look, and they're like, when the right one hits, I'm writing the offer.
Yep.
And our job is to have your house looking the best it can for that buyer who's sitting there waiting.
Exactly. And, I think you only get one shot for a first impression. And like you said, there was a time in which you could go coming soon, put one picture up, and buyers are going to make a sight unseen offer. They don't even know what's inside. That was back in the day. I think now it's even more important to make sure that that first impression really packs a punch, and that when you put it in the MLS and you submit it as active, that you have everything in order, as you should anyway, know what you're selling as an agent, but to have your 3D tour prepared, have the floor plans, because a lot of buyers do come from out of state, and those things matter. And newsflash, if you're a seller and your agent is not marketing your property outside of just who's on the same street or in the same community, you're missing out, because there's a lot of cash heavy buyers from out of state who rely on that online marketing to know if it's worth the flight out here, to know if it's worth putting it under contract to secure it for their pursuit when they land. So online, especially online marketing, is more important than ever. And again, a skill set that is all the more necessary in this market versus before. And, that also, just to kind of, as we kind of transition into the fourth point of talking through managing your seller, and it kind of circles back to where we started, of when you're sitting down at a listing appointment and having those conversations about value, and that the value of your home today actually is not impacted by what you paid for it. It's not impacted by your emotional attachment value. It's not impacted by what somebody down the street sold their house for that's nothing like your house. It's apples and oranges, So I think having those discussions with sellers, honestly, data-driven, that's a skill set that's more important that I think a lot of agents are learning in this market.
Absolutely, it is. And they don't always get the same value for an improvement that shows up on their bottom line on a seller net sheet.
Exactly.
And that's a difficult conversation to have sometime in person after you've toured the home and they've gushed over the wonderful things they've done to their home, and you're secretly adding this up in your head going, we may have over improved this home.
That happens.
And you have to have that conversation that the 50 grand or 100 grand that you just invested may not come back to you as 50 grand or 100 grand.
Exactly.
And talking to an agent throughout the process when you are doing a home renovation is an important thing. If you've got a good relationship with an agent, call them and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Do you think that that would be something that would add equity and value to my home, or should I maybe scale that back?
Yeah.
A $200,000 pool is not going to give you $200,000 of equity.
Oh, well, let's hope you really enjoy that pool. about $150,000 worth, because an appraiser's never going to give it more than about 40. I don't care how amazing it is. An appraiser's probably not going to give it more than about $40,000 or $50,000 worth of value, statistically speaking.
Correct.
And we have to lead with data. We may love your pool, and it may be worth every penny to you and your family, and I hope it was. But if you're talking strictly from an investment perspective and a return on investment perspective, I think that's excellent advice. Let's hope that if you're a buyer or a seller, as you probably are, even if you're a licensed agent, don't be afraid to ask for advice from other real estate professionals, because sometimes you have a skewed perspective of your home whenever you are an agent and a seller. And it is wise to pick up the phone and call a trusted professional. If you're not licensed, call your agent and say, I'm about to do some remodeling. Can you tell me what's likely to provide the biggest return on my investment? Because I think what would surprise most sellers is you don't get dollar for dollar. You never do. Kitchens and bathrooms, smart to spend some money on. Roofs have a good return on investment. Fixing problems. But, I think the mistake we see sellers make is going too far into their preferences and overspending, and then expecting that to just automatically just add to their list price, and it doesn't.
Right. Adding feature walls and expensive lighting fixtures are not going to really increase your value.
Yeah.
And that's something that's hard to hear as a seller when you're sitting there at the table trying to figure out what's my bottom line look like today.
Yeah.
And here's my receipts for what I did. And as a listing agent, I'm certainly going to do a feature sheet and say, hey, this seller has done X, Y, and Z to the home since they've owned it. We want you to know that they have done improvements.
Yes.
However, an appraiser is going to come in and he's probably not going to give a lot of value.
Yeah.
And the transverse of this is I sometimes sit down at an appointment and I've walked into a home that has a pet smell or a smoke smell. And I have to talk about what can we do to mitigate this, because a buyer walking into your home is automatically going to deduct a very high amount to get that taken care of. And I went through a process with someone back in the winter where the house had been smoked in. It was an estate, so she was no longer there.
Yeah.
And he chose to follow my advice, and he repainted the entire house down to the kitchen cabinets, had the floors redone, resealed, like we took care of that, and he had the vents cleaned. Like it was a step-by-step process.
Yeah.
We got a buyer almost immediately.
Yep.
And they never knew that this home had been smoked in because he took it seriously when I said, we've got to mitigate this.
Yeah.
Or it's going to take money out of the bottom line automatically.
Yeah.
So we have hard conversations on over improvements, and sometimes we have them because the home desperately needs something that the person may not even be aware of.
Exactly. And, that's a good point of, you're expected as a listing agent to come in and have these discussions, sometimes difficult discussions, but based on experience and giving the seller guidance that's going to ultimately help them achieve what they want. There are times where we'll go into a listing appointment and the seller's like, well, should I remodel this kitchen before I list? And I'm like, listen, you might spend 50 on it. You might get 30 back for it. So I don't think so. And then on the flip side, in your case, you walk into a property, you always say, if you can smell it, you can't sell it. It's important to say, look, my first impression was this. That's going to be the case for most buyers. Let's remedy that, because it is going to significantly affect their perception of value. And to your point, you made those adjustments and you sold it without a hitch. And it could have sat on market. It could have accrued days. Then suddenly buyers are offering significantly less. There are worthy investments, and there's some that just, if you want to make them for your own enjoyment, great, but don't expect a dollar for dollar return. And those are seller discussions that this market requires you to have. Back in 2021, if it smelled like smoke, somebody probably still buy it. They'd still throw money at it, So it's different market, different conversations. But, I think as we kind of wrap this up, I think the bottom line is, and tell me your thoughts on this, but it's just be an agent that is constantly educating yourself, improving your skill set so that there's no market that's going to derail your business. I mean, you should be able to adapt to the market and your clients' needs. And yes, that comes from experience, but it also comes from intentional improvement of your own skills, your own services. If you're an agent and you want to make it for the long game in this business. Don't rely on one skill set, because you're going to become a professional learner. I mean, you have to be constantly improving your skill set, don't you think?
Yes, you need to be adaptable and coachable.
Yes.
And you need to put yourself in a situation where you are learning from people with experience. That is the best teacher. And when you do have a problem, or you run into this house is not selling and I've done everything I can, be willing to talk to someone who has more experience than you and see if they can offer some insight, something you may not have ever considered in your marketing plan or in your discussions with your seller. So I think being adaptable and coachable are very huge for agents.
Yeah. And aligning yourself with a brokerage where you do have that collaborative environment, because it does take a village. Like, there's going to be agents there that you can bounce ideas off of, that if you're in an environment where fellow brokers are supporting your success, they're not threatened by your success, they're going to offer their advice. They're going to offer, well, here's something that I did that was helpful, that, maybe try it with your seller, or, maybe bring a buyer to your listing, host a broker open house, get feedback from the other agents, and say, look, what am I missing here? Is there anything that you're seeing that jumps out to you that maybe I could point out to my seller that we need to make adjustments about? I do think that it does become even more important to be in the right environment, that you can thrive in any market, because it's not a matter of sitting there and wishing the market was different. It's make yourself better so that in any market you're able to thrive. And a big part of that has to do with your tribe around you.
It absolutely does. And I've always been told the business that you gain in a difficult market is the business you keep forever. And the business that you lose in a difficult market, you never get back. The truth is, this market is not punishing agents. It's simply requiring more from us. It requires better pricing conversations, stronger negotiation, thoughtful marketing, and consistent leadership with our clients. And while that may feel more difficult than we became accustomed to, it's also good, because agents have the opportunity to become great ones. Let's take an honest look at your business. Which skill needs the most attention right now? Pricing, negotiation, marketing, or communicating with sellers when the listing's not moving as quickly as everyone hoped? Choose one, work intentionally, and do not wait for the market to become easier. The agents who improve during this shift will simply not survive it. They will become better positioned and more valuable to their clients. They're prepared for whatever the market brings next. If this episode gives you something to think about, subscribe and come back and listen to us again.